Okay, so we're going to do another top 10 now, and it's going to be the top 10 heavy infantry, and by that I mean infantry that is shielded and has a smaller weapon like a sword, axe, or mace. The spear infantry is its own thing, of course, like it was before. And there are a few things to note with the heavy infantry, and that is the first is that the hit points are a little bit more important than with the two-hander infantry, whereas with the two-hander infantry, the Eldar Enway swordsmen were able to get onto the list because of their pure damage output. Here, the hit points are a little bit more important because overall damage output is not really what these units are about. It's a little bit more about survivability than with the two-handers. And also another thing that I noticed when doing the testing is that armor piercing, or being good versus armor, is more important now than it was. Mainly because I think most units are now pretty well armored, at least at the high end. So in order to be effective, at least very effective, these units need to have armor piercing to get onto this list anyway, because there were several units that are really good, but were denied entry onto this list because they couldn't pierce armor. Stuff like the Dismounted Serpent Guard and the Dismounted Swan Knights even were not able to get onto the list because of that. The Loke Flag Rim, despite not having hit points, were able to beat these units, and they didn't even get onto the list themselves because there are several units that have hit points that were armor piercing, which supplanted them when I was doing the testing. And in terms of being cost efficient, a lot of the units that are at the high end that have decent armor, maybe mid-tier units that have only good armor, it's still very good to have armor piercing because they're obviously going to do a lot more. They're going to be a lot more effective that way, and it's not even as if the non-armor piercing units have got higher base damage to make up for that. It's pretty much similar across the board, which is why there are no Swan Knights, sadly, but we will start at number 10. So at number 10 we have the Dwarven nobleman, and of course with the addition of hit points to a lot of units, the General's bodyguards now are actually pretty useful, and the Dwarven noblemen are no exception. They managed to sneak in at number 10, just ahead of certain other units that missed out. They have 19 attack, 32 defense, and 9 charge. They have 81 men in the unit usually, but that will usually be 82 because the General's usually found in here. They are good versus armor, and they have excellent morale, stamina, and armor themselves, and of course they have 2 hit points. It's a pretty simple unit, honestly, but the fact that they are good versus armor, and the fact that they have pretty high defense, you know, they're dwarves, and obviously they have very good armor themselves. There are Dwarven units which are better, and we will get onto them a little later on in the list, but the Dwarven noblemen managed to get onto this list by virtue of their decently high defense, their 2 hit points, and the fact that they are armor piercing. If they weren't armor piercing, they wouldn't have got on this list by a long way. So it just goes to show how important the armor piercing ability is. So at number 9 we have a unit which took me by surprise really, because I didn't even notice this unit first time going through the unit roster for Dunedain, and that is the Rudder Berserkers. In terms of stats, we're looking at 18 attack, 28 defense, and 10 charge. In terms of stats, they are slightly worse than the Dwarven noblemen at first glance, but they do have 121 men in the unit, which does make them slightly better. They inspire nearby troops, they're good versus armor and in the woods, they have excellent morale, and they have good armor. So I would suggest that these guys are perhaps not going to have the same longevity as the Dwarven noblemen, but at least if you use them correctly, they are certainly better because they do more damage overall, and the fact that they have more men in the unit is good. They're also pretty good value for money at only 880. Well, I say only 880, but it is for a unit that does have 2 hit points, so that's pretty good value for money. But yeah, the Rudder Berserkers. Now, I will say that these 2 units that make up 9 and 10 are sort of in a slightly lower tier to the units that we will be talking about from here on in. But nonetheless, this is a unit which certainly took me by surprise with how good it was when I was doing the testing, the Rudder Berserkers. And at number 8 we have another Gundabad unit in the Witch Realm Blackguard. Now these guys are significantly better than the Rudder Berserkers. The stats are 22 attack, 31 defense, and 8 charge. They only have 102 men in the unit, but the stats are so much better. And also their abilities, they can form shield wall, they're good versus armor and in the snow, and they frighten enemy. Well, they frighten enemies, and in addition to being excellent morale, armor, and stamina. When doing the testing, I expected these guys actually to place a little higher because they are, of course, the sword and shield equivalent to the hammer guard, which did so well in the shock infantry test. but they are a little less survivable than a lot of what comes above them, and that did count against them in the end. Nonetheless, they are still an excellent general's bodyguard if you want to put your general on foot as Gundabad, which you may very well want to because of how Gundabad work as a sort of quantity over quality faction. Although, you know, the fact that they've managed to get 2 units into the heavy infantry top 10 is just a testament to how much better they are now in Reforged. They really have been given a lot of love. And the Witch Realm Blackguards are no exception to that. A very nice looking unit as well. I like the shields, I like the helms. But yeah, the Witch Realm Blackguard are certainly one of the better heavy infantry units in the mod. They had a lot of competition to beat in order to get onto this list. But they aren't quite as good as what is above them, sadly. So we shall move on to that now. So at number 7 we have a unit which has managed to outperform the Swan Knights and Serpent Guard that it was inferior to in vanilla, and that is of course the Dismounted Earls. And there is one simple reason for that, but we'll get onto that. The stats are 21 attack, 29 defense, and 8 charge. 123 men in the unit usually, unless you have the general in it, of course. They can form shield wall as well. They have excellent morale and armor. 2 hit points, of course, like every unit on this list, other than the higher units. And the real thing that makes them better than stuff like the Swan Knights and the Serpent Guard is the fact that they are good versus armor, whereas their peers are not. And that is what makes them so good. Their overall survivability as well makes them slightly better than the Witch Realm Blackguard, despite being, well, the stats of the Blackguard are better, but the fact that the Dale Earls have got slightly more men in the unit does mean that they are better overall. You could argue that the Blackguard's ability to frighten enemies could be used to make them slightly better in a real battle situation, but ultimately I think that the overall survivability of the Earls and the fact that they have more men in the unit makes them better than the Blackguard overall, so Dale having a very good sword and shield unit indeed. Not good enough to get any higher on the list, however, as will become apparent when we move on to number 6. So, at number 6, Harad may not have their Serpent Guard on this list, but their new heavy infantry unit, the Castamir's Chosen, certainly make it on this list. In terms of stats, we're looking at 20 attack, 33 defense, and 6 charge, and 122 men in the unit usually. The charge is a little lower, but the defense is higher. They can form shield wall, they're good versus armor and in deserts, and they have excellent morale, stamina, and armor. What puts them above the Earls, of course, is the fact that they have excellent stamina, and the fact that they are just slightly more tanky all around, but it is small margins that divide most of these units other than the very best ones, it must be said. But yeah, the Castamir's Chosen a very, very good unit to have your general in as Harad, and it is just, in general, a pretty damned impressive heavy infantry unit overall. The fact that Harad were always a faction which favoured sort of more shielded infantry, like in vanilla the Southron Warband and the Serpent Guard and all of that sort of thing, but now Harad have been given a significant buff, and the Castamir's Chosen are now the solid core of their infantry, because they are cheaper than the Serpent Guard and considerably better, so I don't see why you wouldn't use the Castamir's Chosen. You can only have 2 before the cost increases, so maybe that's why, but it gives you a very good, very solid infantry line to go with your cavalry. But now we shall move on to number 5, and here is where things start to get a little bit more elite. So at number 5 only, we have the Smiths of Eregion, and when I started doing the testing, I expected the Smiths to be in contention for the top spot, but actually pretty far from it. They're outperformed by some units pretty drastically. It's not to say they're a bad unit, of course. 16 attack, 39 defense, and 8 charge. The 82 men in the unit does count against them, because there was one unit that managed to get above them simply because they have more numbers and comparable stats, but we'll get onto that in a minute. They can form shield wall, they're good versus armor, excellent morale, stamina and armor themselves, and of course 2 hit points. But yeah, the Smiths of Eregion, pretty much the same unit they always were. Some units have managed to outperform them now, but that's not to say that the High Elves still don't have an exceptional infantry corps. Teaming these guys with the Sindar Blade Masters I've mentioned before makes the High Elves a very damaging, very hard to break down force indeed. But yeah, the Smiths of Eregion, only at number 5. I expected them to place a little higher when I did the tests, honestly. And of course, the unit which has now managed to outperform the Smiths and leapfrog them in terms of the rankings are the Dismounted Dunedain Knights. So, their stats are 16 attack, 42 defense, and 9 charge, and of course they have 123 men in the unit usually. And this enormous defense, in addition to the more men in the unit, is why they're better than the Smiths now. And they can form shield wall. They are now good versus armor, which was a bit of a weakness in vanilla, as why they couldn't manage to defeat the high tier dwarves. well, I say high tier dwarves, the guards of Khazad-dum and the smiths of Eregion in vanilla, that did count against them, but now being good versus armor is very, very important, and they have it. Excellent morale, stamina, and armor as always, and 2 hit points. They look terrific as always. Even next to some of the new units which look very fancy, the Dismounted Dunedain Knights can always throw their hat into the ring as being one of the best looking units in the game. Yeah, they have managed to be better than the Smiths of Eregion, which is no mean feat. And to be fair, Arnor did need it, because they have taken some hits in terms of power in other areas of their army. But they have made some significant gains elsewhere, and in terms of their heavy infantry, this is certainly one of them. The fact that they can go toe-to-toe with the High Elves and possibly outlast them if they are played correctly. So now we move on to the top 3, and there's a similarity between all 3 of them, which we shall see soon. So at number 3 we have Balin's Guard, and their stats are 22 attack, 34 defense, and 9 charge. That's pretty monstrous stats, especially in comparison to some of the others in terms of attack and defense put together, it must be said. Their abilities are they can inspire troops, they're good versus armor and in the snow, they have excellent morale, stamina, and armor. But most importantly, perhaps, they have 3 hit points, which is why they can just tank through most of the others. They're able to outlast the Dunedain Knights, they're able to out-damage stuff like the Smiths. And Balin's Guard, very, very good unit to have your general in as well because of the inspiration ability. Pretty good value for money as well, especially compared to some of the more expensive units, as the Dwarven General. But also, it's nice to have a new high-tier Dwarven unit. These guys are essentially the new variant of the Iron Guard, because the Iron Guard, now, perhaps a slightly more middling unit. They've been redesigned as well, but nonetheless, Balin's Guard. Excellent high-tier Dwarven unit indeed. And now we shall move on to number 2, and I'm sure you'll begin to notice the trend. So at number 2, the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin. Now, this is of course a returning unit, but the stats are much changed. They have 28 attack, 45 defense, and 13 charge. They may only have 62 men in the unit under normal circumstances now, but those stats are ridiculous, really. They can form shield wall, they're good versus armor of course, excellent morale, stamina and armor, and they too have 3 hit points. In addition to that 45 defense, it makes them individually a nightmare to kill. And of course, you know, the high attack as well certainly doesn't hurt. The attack score is higher than anything we've seen so far. So yeah, despite having this few men in the units, the 3 hit points in addition to the enormous stats are what makes them so dangerous. Shield wall, honestly, with this sort of unit is perhaps maybe not so impressive because of how few men there are, but the Dragon Slayer is certainly receiving a relative buff in my opinion, because they are now only one unit manages to outperform them in terms of blunt stats, and it is a pretty close run thing really, but overall they are beaten handily. But yes, the Dragon Slayers. An old favourite returns, and they're not the only one, as we'll see when we see number 1. Of course, at number 1, retaining their crown are the Guards of Khazad-dum. They have 24 attack, 47 defense, and 8 charge. They too have 62 men in the unit. Shield wall, good versus armor, excellent morale, stamina, and armor. Same abilities as the Dragon Slayers. They also have 4 hit points. So that means these guys they may have a slightly lower attack than the Dragon Slayers, but they just do not die. And that's really what heavy infantry is all about, being able to survive in high pressure situations, and no one is better than that. Than the Guards of Khazad-dum. 47 defense and 4 hit points. There's just no other unit which can even come close to that really. The Dragon Slayers make a bold effort, but that's pretty much it. And of course the Dwarves. They have locked down the podium positions with 1, 2 and 3. This is rather unsurprising because it's really what the Dwarves are all about. They do have sacrifices made in other areas to make up for this. You know, cavalry being the main one, but also their skirmishers being only crossbows. Well, they do have a new arch unit as well, but the Dwarves really are all about their survivability when things get tight, and, well, they are very good at that still, the Dwarves managing to outmuscle the competition. As an aside, I realised after making the video that I did actually neglect one unit, and that is the Gondorian Wardens of the White Towers Guard, so this essentially knocks the Dwarven Nobleman out of the top 10. And the reason I actually completely missed them is because they use a very similar little unit portrait down here to a spear unit in Moss, so I assumed they were the Minas Ithil Guardians, and I wasn't actually reading properly, so there we go. I messed up. Just a little adjustment there that I felt like I needed to mention because of how good the Wardens of the White Tower actually are. Of course, they have the effectiveness against armor and all of the accompaniments, and their stats are 22 attack, 36 defense, and 8 charge. So, in terms of the next list, I think I will probably keep with the trend and maybe do the spear infantry and then follow that with the pike, do all the foot infantry first, and of course the Gondor faction overview will be coming soon. I'll see when I can do that, but it should be within the week, I hope. And of course there will be some battles here and there. Hopefully if there's a good one that we play, I will of course upload that as well. But yes, I hope to see you for whatever the next video is. Thank you for watching.